If you grew up anywhere between, say, 1972 and 1985, Saturday mornings probably meant hearing the sounds of the Junkyard Gang.
Hey, yeah.
Exactly. Fat Albert and the Cosby Kids was, I mean, it was more than just a cartoon. It felt like a cultural institution.
It really did. It promised something different, didn't it? Entertainment, but also real-world lessons.
Yeah, genuine moral lessons.
Yes.
We remember it for that theme song, obviously, but also for trying to tackle social problems for inner-city kids, always with a neat little takeaway at the end.
And that memory, that, that nostalgia,
Yeah.
that's what makes this deep dive so complicated and, frankly, pretty painful to look at.
Right.
Because while the show is groundbreaking for putting social commentary on kids' TV, when you really dig into the research, you find what we can only call a profound double darkness.
That dual nature is exactly what we're here to explore with the sources you pulled together. We're trying to figure out how a show that was all about wholesome education became such a complex and tragic story.
We're really going to tackle this in two parts. The first darkness is right there in the show itself. I mean, the genuinely unsettling, sometimes traumatic stuff they use to get those lessons across.
And the second.
And the second, which is maybe even more devastating, is the irreparable stain left by the real-life actions of its creator, Bill Cosby.
Okay, so let's unpack this. How did a children's cartoon, one that started off so simple, get to the point where it decided the best way to teach a lesson was through psychological menace and, well, fear?
You really have to set the stage first. Think about what kids' television was like in the early 70s.
Right, it was all slapstick and, very simple fantasy.
Totally. The biggest problem was usually a forgotten homework assignment or something. Fat Albert was a big departure because it actually tried to talk about poverty and racism and peer pressure.
But the sources show this really clear shift over time. The early, gentle lessons started to give way to something much darker, much more visceral, especially getting into the mid-'80s.
They definitely moved from cautionary tales to, exercises in terror.
And that's where the analysis you found really zeroes in on that 1984 episode, Busted.
Busted, yes. The plot is the Junkyard Gang gets mixed up with a stolen car, and as a consequence, they're taken on a Scared Straight type tour.
To a maximum security prison.
A maximum security prison. And this wasn't just a tough talk. The episode was, it feels like it was engineered specifically for shock value.
When you actually read the transcripts of what was said on Saturday morning television in 1984, it's unnerving. What was the biggest line they crossed, just based on the norms for kids' TV back then?
It wasn't just one line. They just blew past several at once. For a kids' cartoon, the inclusion of veiled sexual threats was just unprecedented.
Yeah, the sources detail that scene where the boys get separated.
And they're accosted by these really intimidating inmates. The analysis records phrases like, give me the big one, which was directed at Fat Albert.
Wow.
It's predatory, menacing language aimed directly at child viewers, designed to make them feel terrified and vulnerable.
And the language wasn't just suggestive like that. Your research also points out the raw profanity.
Yeah, the convicts use words like hell and bastard. For commercial kids broadcasting, that was a cardinal sin.
It was so far beyond the pale that they had to do something completely unique, right?
Yeah, they did. It required Bill Cosby himself to appear in a live-action intro. And his job wasn't just to set up the plot. It was specifically to warn parents that what they were about to see had mature themes and language. The network basically had to break its own format to deliver the lesson.
So they felt the only way to convey the seriousness of prison was to expose their young audience to the kind of psychological aggression you'd only find in adult programming.
Exactly. It's powerful, sure, but that choice to use raw fear as your main teaching tool, that's what makes the material so dark.
The lesson wasn't just don't steal cars.
No, not at all. The lesson was fear this place and these people so completely that you will never, ever risk coming here. It was aiming for a gut-level, lasting emotional reaction.
And that willingness to push boundaries into trauma, it also showed up in another 1984 episode, Gang Wars. But it used grief instead of fear.
Gang Wars is another fascinating one. It's about this feud between two neighborhood groups. And what makes it so significant is that the Junkyard Gang fails.
They can't solve it.
Right. Their usual method of, talking it out and being friends, it doesn't work. It fails to stop the violence.
And the outcome is just. It's brutal. The research describes that heartbreaking moment where an innocent kid, Fernando Garcia, the younger brother of a gang member, is killed in the crossfire.
And what really stands out is the resolution, or I guess the lack of one. A normal cartoon would just reset by the end credits.
Everything would be fine again.
Exactly. This episode refused to do that. It ends by focusing on the memorial for Fernando, with the characters just coping with this profound, irreversible loss. The message was that some mistakes can't be fixed. Some actions cause permanent sorrow.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The show is consistently going into this bleak territory. This wasn't just some final season fluke.
Not at all. If you look back, the seriousness of the topics is remarkable. In 1980, you have The Gunslinger, which was this really stark look at gun violence and accidents. It showed the immediate and fatal results of being careless with a weapon.
And even earlier, 1975, they took on what might be the single most serious topic ever in mainstream kids animation.
Suicidal ideation.
In the episode Dopey's Sister.
Yeah, that episode is about a young girl who is in such despair over her family life and her lack of self-worth that she's thinking about ending her life.
I mean, to put the concept of suicide on a Saturday morning cartoon slot, it shows this incredible commitment to tackling mental health, but also a willingness to expose kids to really high levels of psychological distress.
So the analysis of that first darkness is pretty clear. Fat Albert was groundbreaking, but the price of that moral instruction was exposing its young audience to adult themes of fear, violence, despair, and grief in a way none of its peers ever did.
Exactly. That's the trauma that's embedded right there in the art, which means we have to transition to the second darkness, which is maybe the hardest part of this to process.
The profound, lasting damage caused by the creator himself.
This is where the whole context just flips. The first darkness was about the risks the show took. This second one is about the trust the show betrayed.
Because the entire moral authority of Fat Albert was built on Bill Cosby's public persona.
America's dad.
He was America's dad. The sources really detail how he cultivated that image. He wasn't just an entertainer. He was this wise, trustworthy figure. He was there at the beginning and end of every episode, reinforcing these lessons about safety, about respect, about who kids should trust.
Tying the show's moral foundation directly to his own personal integrity.
Absolutely.
And the irony is just chilling. The whole premise of the show, that a wise, guiding adult is there to protect kids, is now seen through the lens of a serial predator.
The documents lay it all out. The devastating betrayal, the revelations of his decades-long pattern of sexual assault, often using drugs against his victims.
And you think about the episodes he created to teach kids about the dangers of drugs and respecting boundaries.
It's a perverse irony. The public figure preaching about safety was using that very image of trust to commit these horrible acts.
So this raises a really important question. How does that knowledge permanently change the act of watching the show? For everyone who grew up with his voice, his lessons, what is the psychological toll when you realize the teacher was the abuser?
It creates what we'd call a cultural trauma. Specifically, it's the shattering of nostalgia. The ability to separate the art from the artist becomes almost impossible here.
Because he wasn't just the producer.
He was the voice. He was the voice of Fat Albert.
So every single time you hear that voice delivering a moral lesson, every time you see Cosby in a live-action bit telling kids to do the right thing, that sound, that image, is now filtered through the knowledge of his crimes.
The lessons that were meant to build trust about who to rely on when you're vulnerable were delivered by the very person committing these profound acts of betrayal against that trust.
The scale of that damage it permanently stains the show's legacy, doesn't it?
It does. For millions of people, the show isn't a source of comfort anymore. It's this painful, constant reminder of how easily trust can be manipulated by people we're told to see as moral authorities. The good the show did is now just eclipsed by the reality of its creator.
So you have this devastating convergence. The show was unafraid to expose kids to harsh realities, prison, death. But the greater defining exposure is the unforgivable reality of its creator. He turned the show's foundation, trust, into a weapon.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the legacy of Fat Albert is one of modern media's most complex cautionary tales. It's about the intersection of art, morality, and public trust. And that painful complexity means it will be remembered less for the good it tried to do, and more for the deep dual scars it now carries.
So the knowledge from this deep dive really forces you to confront a challenge in media literacy. It's not just about understanding the dark, groundbreaking content, but also about the cultural trauma that gets retroactively applied by the man who delivered those lessons. The show used fear to teach safety, to teach about danger and vulnerability. The betrayal of its creator now defines the show itself as a source of that trauma. What does it mean when the lessons intended to prevent danger are delivered by the very person committing acts of profound betrayal? What stands out to you when you consider this dual darkness?